The moment I had feared, the moment I knew deep down would come sooner or later, arrived with a phone call. David had been away for a week, as he often was, buried in his work, as always. But something had changed in me during that time. I had tried to push it aside, to act like nothing had happened, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan. I felt him. I remembered the way his touch had made me feel, alive in a way that I hadn't felt in years. I tried to ignore it, tried to go back to the role of the dutiful wife. But it was impossible. And when David finally came home, I knew there was no way to hide it anymore. I had already betrayed him, and the weight of that betrayal was unbearable. David came through the door late that evening, looking tired but still carrying his usual air of authority. He had always been the kind of man who commanded respect, who demanded attention, but he had never been the kind of man to truly see me, not the way Ethan had. And that was the problem, wasn't it? The real problem was that Ethan had made me feel wanted in a way that David hadn't in years. And now, I couldn't turn back. David put his briefcase down and kicked off his shoes, a little too loudly, as if to announce his return. His eyes scanned the room, but there was something different in the way he looked at me that night. He had always been distant, emotionally unavailable, but tonight, there was something more in his gaze, something sharper, more penetrating. "Emma," he said, his voice a little too calm, "we need to talk." I felt the blood drain from my face. His tone was too level, too controlled. It was the kind of tone that made my stomach churn, the kind of tone that came before something irreversible. I had spent so many years trying to make this marriage work, but deep down, I had always known something was missing. And now, I had crossed a line that neither of us could ignore. "David, what's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but the fear was creeping in. It wasn't the first time we had had a serious conversation, but tonight, I knew something had changed. The air between us was thicker, charged with tension. David's eyes softened for a moment, but there was a coldness to his gaze that sent a chill down my spine. "You know exactly what's wrong," he said quietly, his voice tight. "I found out, Emma. I found out about Ethan." My heart stopped. I wanted to deny it, to lie, but the truth was out there, wasn't it? There was no escaping it. David had found out, and now, there was nothing left to hide. "David," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? What could I do to fix this? The guilt was already overwhelming, and I knew I had shattered something that couldn't be repaired. David stepped forward, his face unreadable. "I don't know how long you've been hiding it from me. But I know, Emma. I know everything." I stared at him, unable to speak. My body felt like it was made of stone. How could this be happening? How had it all gone so wrong? The silence between us stretched on, broken only by the sound of our breathing. I could feel my pulse racing, the reality of the situation crashing down on me like a wave. And then, David spoke again. "I don't know how it happened, but I know it did. And I'm not angry, Emma." His words hit me like a slap in the face. "I'm just disappointed." I couldn't look at him. I had no right to, not after what I had done. I had betrayed him in the worst way possible, with the one person who was supposed to be off limits. I had let my feelings for Ethan cloud everything, and now, David was left with nothing but the wreckage. "I never meant for it to happen," I said, my voice shaking. "It was a mistake. It was a moment of weakness." David cut me off. "A mistake?" His tone was sharp now, the calm facade slipping. "You think this was a mistake?" This thing with Ethan was more than just a mistake, Emma. It was a choice. You chose him over me. I wanted to argue, to say something, anything, that could make it right. But I couldn't. He was right. I had chosen Ethan. And there was no going back. David stepped back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "It's not that you slept with him. It's that you've been lying to me all this time. All these years, I'd been here, working, providing, and you've been slipping away, little by little, until this happened. I'm sorry, I whispered, but the words felt empty. I never meant for it to go this far. David shook his head. You didn't mean for it to go this far, but you did. And now, I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Emma. I don't know if we can fix this. I felt the weight of his words crush me. The one thing I had always taken for granted, the one thing I had never questioned, was my marriage. And now, I wasn't sure if it could survive the truth. I wasn't sure if I could survive the truth. David didn't say anything else that night. He went to bed, and I stayed in the living room, staring at the empty space between us. The silence was deafening. The truth of what I had done hung over me, suffocating me. But even as the reality of my actions settled in, something else stirred within me. Every time David and I made love, it felt hollow. I felt disconnected. In those moments, I would close my eyes, and all I could see was Ethan. His face, his touch, the way he made me feel like I was the only one who mattered. And it tore me apart. David tried. He tried to bring us back together, to rekindle what we once had. But it wasn't the same. Every time he kissed me, every time he touched me, I couldn't help but think of Ethan. And I hated myself for it. I hated the fact that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase Ethan from my mind. The worst part? When David touched me, I would unconsciously call out Ethan's name. I couldn't stop myself. The guilt of it made me want to crawl out of my own skin, but it was the truth. I had fallen for Ethan, and nothing David did could make me forget that. It didn't take long for David to notice. He was hurt, devastated, and angry. And I couldn't blame him. I had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible, and there was no way to undo the damage I had caused. Our marriage began to crumble. The distance between us grew wider, the emotional gap impossible to bridge. David and I became strangers, our conversations few and far between, our intimacy non-existent. And through it all, Ethan was still there, in the back of my mind, in my heart. I had given him a piece of me that I could never take back. And in doing so, I had lost everything else. Our marriage didn't survive. It couldn't. And as much as I tried to hold on to the pieces of what we had, I knew deep down that I had already lost David. And I had no one to blame but myself. The weight of the secret I had been carrying for months, the secret that had already destroyed my marriage, was now on the verge of tearing apart the one relationship that had always been my constant, my friendship with Claire. I had always been able to talk to her about anything. We had shared our hopes, our dreams, and our deepest fears since we were in college. Claire was more than just my best friend, she was my sister, my confidant, the one person who knew me better than anyone else. No matter what was happening in my life, I knew I could always count on her to be there for me, to listen, to understand. But now, I was about to lose her. I had spent months avoiding her, guilt eating at me every time we spoke. I told myself I was doing it for her, for our friendship. But deep down, I knew I was running away from the inevitable confrontation that was bound to happen. I had been hiding my affair with Ethan from her, and I had no idea how to face her once she found out. It wasn't until one fateful afternoon that the truth came crashing down. Claire had been visiting me regularly, but lately, she had been quieter, more distant. I had attributed it to her busy work schedule, but deep down, I knew she was sensing that something was off. She had always been intuitive, and she could see right through me. It was a Thursday when everything came to light. Claire showed up unannounced at my house, as she often did. I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch, trying to keep myself busy. I heard the front door open and her footsteps in the hallway. She was walking quickly, purposefully. I turned to greet her, but the expression on her face stopped me cold. Her eyes were narrow, her lips pressed into a tight line. I could see the hurt and suspicion in her gaze. I knew something was wrong. "Emma," she said, her voice calm but laced with a quiet intensity, "we need to talk." I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart pounded in my chest. About what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She crossed the room and stood in front of me, her eyes not leaving mine. About Ethan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, Emma. I know everything. I froze. The world around me seemed to slow down. I didn't know what to say. How had she found out? How long had she known? The truth was, I couldn't keep hiding it anymore. The secret was out, and it was only a matter of time before it shattered everything. How did you find out? I stammered, my voice shaking. I didn't want to look at her, but I couldn't look away. I had never been more afraid in my life. I found your phone, Emma, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I saw the messages. The texts you sent him. The pictures. The plans. You think I wouldn't notice? You think I wouldn't feel the shift between us? I could feel the walls closing in on me. I had no excuse. I couldn't lie to her. Not now. I'm so sorry, Claire, I whispered, my voice breaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake, and I never should have let it go this far. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and pain. A mistake, she repeated, her voice trembling. A mistake? You betrayed me, Emma. You betrayed our friendship for him. I had never seen her look at me like that before. The anger in her eyes was something I had never imagined. The woman who had always been my rock, my safe place, now looked at me like a stranger, someone she couldn't recognize. I didn't want to hurt you, Claire, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to destroy everything. But I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. How could I explain to her the emotions I had buried so deep inside? How could I make her understand what had driven me to make such a reckless, selfish decision? Claire shook her head, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You think I'm just going to forgive you? After everything? After you slept with my son, Emma? The words hit me like a slap in the face. She didn't need to say anything more, the devastation in her voice was clear. I don't know what to say, I said, the tears starting to fall. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. But I was lost, Claire. I was alone in my marriage, in my life, and then Ethan, he made me feel seen again. He made me feel alive. And I stopped, unable to continue. I felt like I was choking on the weight of it all. She stepped back, her face twisted in disbelief. You think that justifies it? You think that gives you the right to betray me, to betray everything we've built? I couldn't answer her. I couldn't explain the shame, the guilt, the helplessness I had felt as I fell deeper into this affair. But none of it mattered now. All that mattered was the look in her eyes, the look of someone who had been burned by the person they trusted most. You were my best friend, Emma, Claire said, her voice barely audible. You were the one person I thought I could trust. And now I don't know who you are anymore. The pain in her words cut deeper than anything I had felt. I had lost her. I had lost the one person who had been there through everything. And for what? For a fleeting, selfish connection that had torn apart everything I cared about. I'm sorry, I whispered, but it felt hollow. There was nothing I could say that could make it right. The damage was done. And I had lost her. Claire stood there for a long moment, her arms crossed, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. I watched her go, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence that filled the house. And just like that, the last piece of my life, the last piece of what I thought I could hold on to, slipped away. I sat down on the couch, the weight of what had happened crashing down on me. My marriage was in ruins. My friendship was shattered. I had hurt the two people who meant the most to me in this world, and for what? I had nothing left but the aftermath of my actions. I had lost Ethan. I had lost David. And now, I had lost Claire. I had lost it all.